everyone, Kim here at City Oasis in Northern California. I was going to walk around my whole fruit orchard, but it is pretty hot out here this afternoon, despite the fact that we have been cooling down into just the upper 90s, low 100s the past week. But it's still too hot for me, so I had to sit here in the shade of my Liberty apple tree to do this little intro. Today, this morning actually, I filmed a late August garden tour of my Northern California Zone 9B garden. So come along with me and let's go see what is going on, what is thriving, and what I am harvesting currently in my hot, dry summer garden. So in this bed, I have two kinds of personal size melons growing, as well as some echinacea in the middle. And the melons are Noir de Carme and Emerald Gem melon. Now, I've been harvesting over the last week or two because the Noir de Carme definitely have been ripening much faster and much more prolifically than the Emerald Gem. You can see them in their bright yellow. They turn yellow almost overnight when they're ripe. Now, you can pick them before they're fully ripe because they will continue to ripen on your kitchen counter. The problem is they come ripe so fast and just come right off the vine then that I often don't catch them before they're fully ripe. In fact, I've harvested about 6 or 7 so far, and it looks like there's another 6 or 7 ready to harvest now. This is the way I like to harvest them, where there's still a touch of green in them. Then they're not quite as soft, maybe even a little more green than this. But this was delicious too. It's not overly ripe in the sense of so mushy it falls apart. If they get that way, which a couple have, I give them as an extra special treat to my chickens, who absolutely adore them. Still have some autumn beauty sunflowers blooming. They're definitely my favorite sunflowers. I just love this rich fall color. And the red Roselle hibiscus bed continues to look, awesome. It's just growing fabulously and is one of the very few plants that actually does not seem to mind the 105 to 115 degree Fahrenheit weather that we've been having for 2 months now. It's growing very nicely, continuing to send out lots of new growth, and I just can't wait until next month, I think, is when the blooms are going to start coming on. Definitely by the end of September, beginning of October, I'm going to be able to start enjoying the glorious, deep, rich pink blooms that I just love so much. And then comes the really fun part of making tea and jam and scones and all sorts of delicious things from the calyxes. Cherry tomatoes, of course, continuing to ripen. Another plant that really doesn't mind the heat, although now that it's come down this past week to the lower 100s, and even today it's only supposed to get to 95, it will start ripening its fruit and producing more of it, a lot more actually, over the next few months. Here is something really fun that I didn't expect to happen. Actually, two somethings. This here, which I think I'll tie up to this nearby cage, is a volunteer tomatillo, and it's beginning to send out blooms. Tomatillas do blossom and fruit later in the summer and early fall, I've noticed, at least here in my Zone 9B garden. But yeah, I didn't plant that. That just came up, and it actually came up in one of my pathways, so I moved it here. I thought it was a tomatillo, and sure enough, it is. And then right next to it, coming from this very unassuming, almost dead-looking vine, or stem, I should say, is, follow it up, yeah, and over here, this is my one loofah plant, and it's in blossom. I started 3 or 4 of them, and only one made it to this stage, which, like I said, I didn't really think it would, considering the looks of that stem, but it has. It sent up 2 different vines. This one on the right is coming on a little later than the other, but I think they're going to do just fine. I'm hoping to get at least one loofah off this plant. Well, in this bed, all I've got going on right now are some walking green onions and one little squash plant. I think it's a delicata. It's the only one that survived the heat. Yeah, when the squirrels finally stopped coming around, I thought I had it made, but then we had 2 or 3 weeks of such hot weather that most of the squash gave up their fight. But I do have some still going, a couple of butternuts, this delicata, and what is it? Oh, some kabocha, but this one's so small. I'm hoping it can make it now that we're predicted to stay down at 100 or less instead of the high heat we've been having. Here's one of my other squashes that made it through both the squirrels and the heat. It's still blossoming, and I've got one squash on there, which I will take off right now. There we go. That's a baby one. Hopefully it will be good. I'm not even sure what kind it is. It looks like a butternut, sort of. But I didn't plant butternut over here, I didn't think. We shall see. And behind it, I have a new long red noodle bean plant growing up the trellis. Happy about that because I love long red noodle beans. These are the emerald gem melons. They ripen later than the noir de carme, but they are just as delicious, just a slightly different taste. I love experimenting with different melons, and I especially love these personal size ones. Yeah, there's a big one there. Hopefully I'll get some more melons out of this bed, but I do have some melons growing in containers on my patio, so yeah, I eat them as they come, and if I happen to miss one, which occasionally I do, like I said, the chickens just appreciate it. Boy, this society garlic never fails to bloom or give off its magnificent scent. I can't really eat much garlic at all, very much bothers me, but the smell, oh my gosh, so lovely. And you can take the greens from this plant and add them to your sauté or to your salad, and lovely garlic flavor, and for me, doesn't bother my stomach at all. Lots of limes on my lime tree that desperately needs to be repotted. You know, limes are really just lemons that have been found to taste really good before they're ripe while they're still green. So if you don't take them off when they're green, like this one here, then they will start to turn yellow. They're still great tasting though, and I love juicing them and freezing the juice, which I can then use in all sorts of delicious recipes throughout the year. And of course, I can use them in margaritas. And do you see what I see down below the lime tree? That is another volunteer borage. Soon it will be sending up its lovely blue blossoms. Really, borage likes the cool temps of spring and fall. It survives through the summer. You know, you're not going to kill it off. At least it's very, very difficult to do that. But it will bloom its best and look its best by far in the very early spring and in the fall, if you're lucky. The purple tree kale, now that the temps are falling all the way down into the 90s, is, well, taking on new life again. It does do fine through the summer, and after I cut off its late spring, early summer blooms and seeds, if I let it go to seed, it will send out new growth. However, it tastes the best and it looks the nicest in the fall, winter, and spring. And wow, what a wonderful stir-fry ingredient this is. So healthy for you, these greens. The nutrients that are in this purple tree kale, just absolutely amazing. You know, not to mention how wonderful it tastes. And I've got a lot of purple tree kale cuttings growing in this trough. I'll tell you what, the two easiest plants to root from cuttings have to be purple tree kale and fig trees. And I'll have a video coming up soon about fig trees and how you can grow so many, share with others, and have all the figs you want. But the same goes for purple tree kale. If we go down in here, you'll see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, oh, there's one behind it, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 there. Here I put a really big, thick cutting in, which most people say won't root, and boy did it root. It has become a multi-stalked, huge plant. It's got like 6 big thick stalks over 3/4 of an inch to an inch in diameter. And each of them can easily become their own tree kale plant. How easy are they to root? Well, you just find a likely stalk, say like this one here. You break it off at the trunk, as it were. You take off a couple of the top leaves and you plunk it in some soil and keep it damp. Yeah, it is pretty amazing. And they make such a healthy addition to your food year-round. Actually, they are my absolute favorite green to eat and one of the most nutritious. Another great thing about purple tree kale that I found here in my Northern California garden is that it basically has no pests. I've never seen aphids on it. I've never seen any kind of bug on it. As opposed to collard or, well, a lot of the brassicas, this kale just stays beautiful and seems to have some sort of inner resilience, inner resistance to pests. And hey, I'm all for that. Who wouldn't be? Okay, definitely time to cut back the lemon verbena again. Have to do this several times a year. This plant grows so crazy big. But nothing beats it for, wow, the taste and the scent. I love this in teas, but I also just love walking by it. Rhubarb still doing well here in this microclimate where it gets a lot of filtered sun all day, but not any intense sun. And the chickens behind, who I'm ready to let out now with my older chickens. And I'm thinking I might use this run I made just for them for the last several months as an enclosed garden area that the squirrels cannot get into for some of my plants next year. Now it's definitely time to harvest my Moon and Stars watermelon. There are 12 or 14 of them in this bed and they are definitely ripe. Now you might have heard how to tell that watermelon are ripe by looking at the tendril nearest the stem, which would be this one. And you see how it's all brown and dry? That generally means your watermelon is done. It is ripe and ready for you to pick. But there are other signs. Sometimes you won't find a tendril that have been broken off, and sometimes you're just not sure. Supposedly that sounds dull and hollow when it's ripe, when you knock on it, but that has never worked for me. Not because I don't think it's accurate, maybe it is, but more because I can't really tell what dull and hollow is supposed to sound like. But there are other signs that will tell you your watermelon is ripe, and what might they be? So these are not in any particular order, but some signs that your watermelon are ready for you to pick and eat and enjoy are that the finish on the watermelon is no longer shiny, but rather a matte. And definitely my watermelon in this bed have that going for them. Another sign is that this end down here, the blossom end, has a very, very slight give to it. This may be something you've heard about cantaloupes in the store, that there should be a soft little give to the blossom end. And it holds true for watermelon as well. By the way, if you're wondering why the Moon and Stars watermelon have that name, it's because they have these yellow dots on them. And the large one that most of them develop is known as the moon, and then all the little small ones are the stars. Another sign that your watermelons might be ready to harvest is that the bed, the greens, are dying back. Now there definitely are still a lot of green leaves in this bed and a lot of fresh green growth coming out at the end. Even some new blossoms. But by and large, this bed is dying off. And that tells me also that it's time to look at picking my watermelon. 2 more signs that your watermelons are ripe are that when you turn it over, what used to be the white underbelly has now turned yellow. I'm not sure if you can tell in this bright sunlight, but it is. And there might be a little scar on it. That's fine too. Let's look at a few more of them. Okay, here's a big one. We're going to turn it over. Oh my gosh. Ugh. And yes, the underside is definitely yellow. Now, this brings me to my last sign, and that is that these suckers are heavy. Yeah, they are ripe when they're a lot heavier than they appear. So I'm going to go about harvesting the watermelon. Well, I got them all out of the bed and I ended up with 16 watermelon, not counting these two right here because they were the only ones that were overly ripe. They haven't split yet, but they're soft all over, not just a little bit on the blossom end. So I'm gonna cut those open and give those two to the chickens. But otherwise, I'm super pleased. So many watermelon. We're going to really be enjoying this throughout the next few weeks, and I'm going to come up with all kinds of things I can do with them. One of my favorite things to do is to freeze them in cubes. They're so good that way and so refreshing, but they also make great drinks. And of course, who doesn't like to eat them fresh, preferably outside so you don't get the sticky messiness everywhere. But they taste so good, and this is such a sweet variety, the Moon and Stars, so I highly recommend that you grow it. The Moon and Stars variety is heirloom, and it was introduced in the 20s. It's also known as the Cherokee watermelon because the guy who originally got the seed for the seed company, I think it was the Henderson Seed Company, his name was Hales, and he got it from a Cherokee man who said they'd been growing it for ages. So that's why it's also known as the Cherokee melon. And of course I have my little Nordic carm melons and my mystery squash. Really enjoying this harvest. The next thing to do here in this bed is to clear it, but I'm not going to pull the plants out. If you're a beginning gardener, you might think that, of course, that's what you do, but actually it's much better for your soil, underground life and nutrition, and your future crops to leave all the roots in the ground. So I'm going to cut these off at ground level. If this was my fall crop, I would then lay all the greens on the soil and let them rot down. I might cover them with a tarp or with some straw or with a shallow layer of soil or compost, but really as long as they're lying there all winter, even if they're not covered, they're going to decompose and feed your soil. Since I am putting in another crop here though, probably some more pepper plants, maybe a few cherry tomatoes, I'm going to take the greens and put them in my compost pile. So that's the job for tonight or tomorrow morning or sometime this week. So the peppers have continued to grow well throughout the summer, and I have been harvesting from them for many weeks, and I need to do another harvest now. I'm especially behind on harvesting the pepperoncinis, and more about those in just a moment. Meanwhile, the Cubanelles continue to be one of my most prolific and dependable peppers. So I'll go ahead and harvest them now. 5 nice sized ones, which is great considering, like I said, I've been harvesting almost daily from the pepper plants. Now, this beautiful pepper plant with the variegated leaves and the purple blossoms and little purple peppers, I'm not sure what it is. At first I thought it was a Buena Mulata. Then I thought it was an Aurora. It took forever to take off, and it's just now starting to produce peppers, but they're tiny and round, so I know that it's not a Buena Mulata. Auroras usually are prolific, and though they start off purple, they turn red, yellow, orange, all different colors. It's a rainbow plant, and I don't ever remember the Aurora plant having such beautiful leaves. So it's a mystery. I'm not a fan of little tiny peppers though, so if they don't grow any bigger, I won't be growing it again. However, this plant is producing wonderful peppers. Again though, not sure what it is. More than any other year this year, my labels got mixed up. I planted so many different varieties of peppers, and then a lot of them got wiped out by the early heat, and so then I replanted. Got one turned a beautiful orange there. But yeah, I just don't know. I'm going to have to look at the pictures on the seed packets and then see what these taste like to decide what it is. Here I've got banana peppers, sweet banana peppers, and next to it is a Jimmy Nardello, which has been producing amazingly. I mean, I have had dozens off of this plant already. They haven't gotten as large as some of my other Jimmy Nardello plants in the past, but very prolific. The pepperoncini plants, which I've only ever eaten pickled green, most of them turn bright red very quickly, and there are a lot in here. They're kind of buried, but they're all in there. The buried ones will probably be better because the ones that are out on the top, as you can see, have suffered some sun damage. Now, when a larger pepper has some sun damage, it's not an issue to cut a little bit off and still use the rest of it. It's going to be kind of tedious with these. In fact, these are so small, they border on too small for me to want to grow. Ironically, the plant next to it, which took much longer to take off and so is much smaller, is growing much bigger peppers. Although there has come a branch off the bigger plant that is now producing green peppers, and they're staying green as they grow. So I think a lot of it probably has to do with the heat, and these came into their growth spurt after the intense heat of July. So anyway, we're going to try them out. These are a little larger too, which I prefer. So I may just start my pepperoncinis, which do grow very easily and prolifically, a little later in the summer to avoid them getting sunburned so much. Here we have some Georgia Flames. It's a new plant for me, so we'll see what these are like. More accurately, my kids will tell me what they're like. Because they love peppers, I have to be careful with them. Because though I love the taste, they don't love me. So my harvesting resulted in these red ones are Georgia Flames. These green ones on the right are Tunisian Baccalauti. And then here I've got a bunch of Jimmy Nardello. And these are Sweet Bananas. And these are just a tiny bit of different colorings. I've got some green, some turning red, and then some red of the pepperoncinis. And then a couple of Buena Mulatas that are not as big as they usually get. So I'm going to see if the plant, now that the heat is dying back just a tad, will become more vigorous and send out larger peppers. And then these two are off the plant that I'm not sure what it is. So I took one green and one orange. The rest I'll leave on and let them turn orange and red, and we're going to do taste tests. I do think that peppers taste very different at different stages of ripeness, and I like that. Often I prefer them green. So here we go. I'll be cooking with some of these, and the others will go right in the freezer because later I'm definitely going to want to make some salsa. Well, I just came out here to close up this video, and I thought if I was in the shade I wouldn't be too hot, but I'm just pouring sweat. Even 98 is too much for me, I guess, at this point. I remember the days when 115 felt great to me. Let me warn you, if you're under, say, 50, 55, you don't know. Once you hit that point, you're like, okay, I loved heat before, but now I'm ready to move on. Summer was my favorite season for all my life until a few years ago. Now fall, and followed by spring, followed by winter, lastly summer. I just never would have thought that would happen, but age does things to you. Still, I love having so many trees, my olive orchard, my fruit orchard. There's always some shade around somewhere. And actually, I do plan to incorporate a lot more trees in my veggie garden in the coming years, whether that be here or the place I move, which will be happening, who knows, in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And those trees will, of course, be providing edibles, but also much needed relaxation areas where I can enjoy shade in the afternoon hours. I didn't used to value shade as much as I do now, but shade is important, especially in a place like Zone 9B, Northern California. All right, well, I'll see you all on the next video. Meantime, stay safe and take care of yourselves and have a wonderful week out in your garden and out in nature.